This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. On our wedding night, my husband insisted we play a little game. It was a game where we exchanged secrets, the deepest secrets of our hearts. Rocky, half joking, said, "I slept with your best friend." I made the first move. When it was my turn, I paused for a moment. "I killed someone. Do you believe me?" Rocky burst out laughing. "Darling, are you upset by what I just said? I was just teasing you. I only said that because I love seeing you get jealous." Rocky, a well-known rich playboy, had countless experiences in romance. His decision to marry me, a Cinderella from a humble background, shocked everyone. It seemed reasonable that he wanted one last fling before settling down. Rocky urged me eagerly, "Come on, you have to share a secret too." I hesitated as I touched my handsome husband's face. "All right, but after hearing it, don't regret it." Of course. The alcohol took hold, and the memories buried deep within my soul began to resurface. I stared into my husband's eyes. "I killed someone 15 years ago. And that person was my biological father. My father was a good man before he became a gambler. He worked as an accountant at a state-owned factory. Life wasn't wealthy, but it was warm. Then the stock market crash of 2007 hit. That year, everyone went crazy. The whole country was obsessed with stocks. My father couldn't resist the temptation. At first, he just used some spare money to play around, but he got more and more addicted. He wanted bigger gains, so he started using the factory's funds. It got worse and worse. To cover the losses, he made a terrible decision, borrowing 500,000 yuan from a loan shark, thinking he could win it back and quietly return the money. Rocky scoffed at this point. "Amateurs always think they can beat the system." Exactly. My father believed he could turn things around. Each loss pushed him further, and he kept chasing his losses. He lost his job, sold our house and car, and still couldn't repay his debt. The loan sharks beat him up and even threatened to kill him. My mother had no choice but to beg our relatives for help, even selling my grandmother's property to pay off some of the debt. We cried together, and my father swore he'd change. But soon after, he borrowed from the loan sharks again. "How long will it take to pay back all that money?" My father said confidently. "One hand of cards could win me 10,000. If I'm lucky, I can make it back in 3 or 4 rounds." After my father fled, my mother and I went into hiding, but no matter where we moved, the loan sharks always found us. My life quickly spiraled into darkness. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. One day, my father suddenly came to pick me up from school. I hadn't seen him in months. He told me he'd found a new job and that we would soon be reunited as a family. Back then, I was just a high school freshman. I didn't understand people's true nature yet. I believed my father had simply made a mistake and would turn his life around. I held my father's hand excitedly, telling him how I had gotten first place in my class and was chosen to compete in a math competition. "Dad, I'll work hard. I can take out student loans for college. You won't need to pay for anything." He listened absent-mindedly, always keeping an eye on our surroundings. When I said I was thirsty, he handed me a bottle of Coke. How thoughtful of him to open it for me. His hands were trembling, causing bubbles to rise. I didn't notice the flicker of hesitation in his eyes as he handed it to me. I drank that bottle of Coke, the one that would change my life forever. "Your father, he drugged you." Rocky's voice tightened with disbelief. "Is it that surprising? When gamblers reach the end, they lose their humanity. A father's role means nothing at that point." After drinking it, I lost consciousness completely. When I woke up, I was lying in a bed in a high-end hotel. The air was thick with the smell of perfume and something rotten. My father sat beside me with a gentle smile, saying I had passed out from heat exhaustion and shouldn't push myself too hard in school. My whole body ached, and I couldn't remember anything. Every attempt to recall brought excruciating pain, leaving me with only fragmented, chaotic images. My memory was blank. I was terrified, drifting in a daze as I left. My father gave me strict instructions. "Your mother doesn't let me see you anymore. So you have to keep this a secret, okay? Trust me, I'll make a comeback and send you to the best schools, even abroad." But I wasn't stupid. Something had definitely happened. My body was covered in bruises, especially down there. Even though I had been thoroughly cleaned, there were traces of blood. My school uniform had been replaced with a different set of clothes. Every step I took sent waves of unfamiliar pain through my body. I was scared and eventually told my mother everything. She immediately took me to get examined, and it was confirmed. I had been assaulted. Not by one person, but by many. My world collapsed. I locked myself in my room, refusing to eat or see anyone. I even thought about ending my life, but I couldn't bear the thought of dying without justice. I couldn't accept that my father would treat me like this. My father had always been kind to me. Unlike others who valued sons over daughters, he never did. He enrolled me in the most expensive tutoring classes. At this point, my eyes welled up with tears, and my voice softened when I admired the factory director's daughter for playing piano. My father went out to deliver water and resell secondhand appliances just to buy me a brand new piano. I continued, my voice breaking. Whenever it rained, and we had to walk through a muddy path, he would lift me onto his shoulders, saying, "Hold on, princess. Let's go home." The view from his shoulders was so wide, and I spread my arms, laughing as the wind danced around us. I'll never forget how my father looked as he carried me. Could that same father really have sold me to strangers? But he did find us again. He knelt in front of me, begging, "Do you want to see your dad get killed?" I had no choice. How can I repay millions of yuan? Now they're offering us a deal. If you work for them for 5 years, they'll erase all my debt. Just 5 years. The world felt so strange, so absurd. My father was sobbing, his head banging on the floor. Just 5 years, and all you have to do is take more medicine. Take enough, and you won't get pregnant. Please save me. When my mom came home from work and saw this, she lunged at him, screaming, "You monster. Get out." They fought viciously, my father choking my mother, eyes bulging with terror. What else could I do? You don't know how brutal they are. I've seen them cut off hands and organs. My mom struggled to breathe, her hands clawing desperately at his. And that's when I did it. Bang. My father turned in disbelief. It was me. I had raised a trophy high above my head, and I brought it down on the back of his skull with all my strength. She pulled it tight, so tight that my father's eyes bulged. I seized the chance, gathering all my strength, and struck him again. My father collapsed to the ground, motionless. After a long while, my mother trembled as she reached out to check for his breath. No breath. We had conspired to kill my father. It was my mother's most natural instinct to protect me. What was wrong with her wanting to protect me? I didn't want to be sold again. Was that wrong too? But if we called the police, we would always be the ones at fault. We would carry the burden of murder for the rest of our lives. My future, my innocence, my life would be destroyed. We were terrified, not knowing what to do next. My mother cautiously peered outside. The alley was silent, bathed in the still moonlight. At the entrance of the alley, there was someone, an old lady who ran the convenience store, named Kathy. Luckily, she was blind. We stuffed my father into a red, white, blue bag, dragging it slowly, one in front, one behind. As we passed Kathy, she suddenly spoke. "Where are you going so late?" Haley's mom, the old lady, hunched over, sat in the darkness. Her milky, clouded eyes, seemingly without pupils, appeared to be looking at us. My mother was startled, her hands loosened, and the body bag dropped to the ground. Her voice was tense, strained. "Nothing, just taking out some trash." The old woman looked in our direction, expressionless. "But that trash is too big, too fresh. You can't just throw that away." I was stunned. It turned out Kathy had a congenital eye condition, but she wasn't really blind. She had been using her blindness to scam multiple benefits. Cold sweat covered my back, and fear took over my soul. I could barely breathe. What should I do? Would she call the police? Or blackmail us? But I had nothing to offer. Kathy's cloudy eyes locked onto me. "I can help you, if you're willing to trust me." At this point in the story, I felt thirsty. Rockey, deeply engrossed, urged me to continue. He was clearly captivated by the story. I wasn't in a rush. Instead, I asked him, "If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" He thought for a moment. "I suppose I'd agree. There's nothing to lose at that point. Might as well take a gamble." In 2005, cameras weren't as widespread as today. There's still a chance to get away. But can an old lady really pull it off? I wasn't too satisfied with that answer. There's not just one option, you know. Half my face hidden in the shadows, I chuckled softly. We had 2 people, and Kathy was just a lonely old blind woman. So, we had another option, to silence her for good. Rocky's expression changed when he heard that. I grabbed his hand, his palm was damp and cold. I held it gently, comforting him. The thought of killing her did cross my mind. I was so confused at the time. For a brief moment, I felt like my father, betting everything in a desperate move. When you're cornered, your survival instinct can turn you into the most reckless gambler. In the end, I chose to trust her. Kathy told us to drag the body to her kitchen, and we followed her instructions. She first asked my mother what she planned to do. My mother, having watched too much television, had only a vague idea of destroying the body. Throw it in the ocean, or maybe a landfill. Her rambling made Kathy laugh coldly. "What nonsense. How will you dispose of it? Take a taxi?" ride a bus? And how will you wrap it? In a bag or suitcase? Do you even have one? My mother shook her head in defeat. Kathy's questions were sharp and realistic, leaving her powerless. At this hour, calling a taxi would definitely make people remember you. And you don't even have the basic tools to dispose of the body. The nearest bay is 130 kilometers away. Besides, a body's liver temperature can determine time of death. If the trail leads back to you, neither of you will escape. What could we do? We were at a complete loss. Kathy spoke in a low voice. It's not hard to deal with, really. If the body disappears, there's no time of death to trace. From that day on, the old lady stopped selling fried meat pies. She switched to selling braised meats instead. My mother worked as her assistant, with Kathy overseeing everything. Neighbors were curious, but Kathy would cheerfully say, "I've got skills that shouldn't go to waste. Haley's mom is hardworking and diligent. We're going to make a fortune together." Indeed, Kathy was skilled at braising meat. She said the secret to tender, light-flavored meat was controlling the heat and skimming the oil. If the heat's too high, the meat will dry out and burn. If it's too low, the sweetness won't penetrate the meat. Before dawn, my mother would haul back 30 kilos of frozen meat from the market. Inside were pig heads, feet, intestines, chicken hearts, duck hearts, over 10 different parts. My mother nervously wrung her hands. Will they notice? Kathy immediately glared at her. Who doesn't use frozen meat? Just use more seasoning. No one can tell. Oh, and don't be lazy when cleaning the pig heads. The ear hairs and nose hairs need to be thoroughly cleaned. During those days, my mother didn't sleep a wink, never daring to leave the braising pot for a moment. Her hard work paid off. When she finally uncovered the pot, the rich aroma of the meat filled the entire room. My mother couldn't help but take a deep breath. It smells amazing. Not only did it smell great, but we were generous with the portions. The people living around here weren't wealthy, so Kathy told my mother to bake some flatbreads, chop up the braised meat, and stuff the bread full. One bite, and the bread was crispy, the meat was sweet. How could business not thrive? Even the loan sharks ate plenty. After my father disappeared, the loan sharks were the most anxious. One day on my way home from school, I was cornered by a group of them, looking vicious. "Where's your father?" They held a knife to my throat, but I didn't make a sound. The leader grabbed my hair, seething with anger. "Don't play dumb. You might fool others, but you can't fool me. I know he came to see you the night he disappeared." I was beaten to the brink of death, yet I insisted on pretending to know nothing. "What are you all doing? Stop it." The police, attracted by the sound of the fight, took away the loan sharks. The thugs were still arrogant. Paying off debts is only right and proper. Her dad owes money, so she has to pay it back. The officer sternly warned. Right and proper? Let me tell you, debts from gambling are illegal debts, and the law does not support creditors in collecting them. Your illegal debt collection violates the law seriously. If I catch you harassing Haley again, it won't just be a 7-day detention. I had bet correctly. I sobbed outwardly, but felt relieved inside. The officer was indeed upright, and all my detours along this road were not in vain. The policeman glanced around my bare-bones rental house, and when his eyes fell on my math competition trophy, my breath hitched. One corner of the trophy was chipped, likely from when it struck my father's skull. "It's fine," I kept reassuring myself. It had been a month since my father disappeared. A gambler abandoning his family and disappearing or dying was common. Even if they examined it, there would be no result. Finally, the policeman merely patted my shoulder sympathetically. "My daughter is in your class. She's mentioned you before. Haley, you mustn't give up on your studies. You and your father are independent individuals in civil law. You have no obligation to pay his gambling debts. If they bother you again, call me directly." With the help of my teacher, I lived on campus, and the loan sharks never troubled me again. I smoothly passed the college entrance exam. The day I left, I asked Kathy, "Why did you help me like that?" "Why not? I wanted to." The old woman silently looked at the wall. I followed her gaze and saw 2 memorial plaques belonging to her daughter. Only then did I recall some old gossip. Kathy had a tough life. She lost her husband early, and her daughter, after finally growing up, married the wrong man. 8 months pregnant, she was beaten by her husband and jumped to her death. Not long after, the man mysteriously disappeared. Perhaps, her son-in-law hadn't fled out of guilt, but was still here. Well, then my dad won't be lonely, I thought to myself as I wiped the braising pot. Later, I went to study in Beijing, received a government scholarship to go abroad, worked, met you, everything that followed. You already know. This is my secret. In the romantic atmosphere of our new home, Rocky's expression grew strange. He stared at me, suspicion filling his eyes. My love story with Rockey was nothing short of dramatic. We met at a ski resort during a cable car accident. Rockey has claustrophobia, and I had to help him, who was in distress, walk to find rescue. Earlier in the wedding speech, Rockey mentioned his first visit to my home. One time, after flying back for over 10 hours, Haley picked me up and made me a bowl of hot braised noodles. I used to live a rootless life, waking up in different hotels every day, floating through life. But in that moment, seeing her busy in the kitchen, I felt a kind of security I'd never experienced before. So many people want something from me, and I can always tell. But Haley, I knew you were just after me, the person. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I covered my face. His sweet words still echoed in my ears, but barely 2 hours later, Rockey instinctively avoided my kiss. The romantic atmosphere of our wedding night was entirely gone. I was about to explain when the maid knocked on the door. "Madam, guests from your hometown have arrived." As I went to greet the visitors, Rockey glanced over nervously, but with just one look, he froze in place. In the living room, the old woman who had rushed in, dusty and tired, had those same cloudy, blind eyes. At that moment, the boundary between the story and reality blurred. Someone who should have only existed in the story was standing right in front of him. Why? Could the murder story be real? Cold dread crawled up Rockey's spine. He felt as if he had fallen into a meticulously crafted trap. The bowl of braised noodles that had won over his taste buds was made by his girlfriend's hand. From an old, reddish-brown braising jar, she quickly fished out a piece of deeply braised, dark red meat, chopping it finely with scallions. The scent was so mouth-watering. "Sweetheart, your cooking is even better than our 5-star chefs." He would always devour the dish, even drinking the broth clean, and his girlfriend would laugh meaningfully. "Really? It's my mom's secret braising recipe, refined over many years. It's different from the outside stuff, of course." Many years of braising. Rockey's head spun, his stomach cramping with nausea. The idea that the woman beside him could be a killer. No, even if it was out of desperation, he couldn't accept it. Rockey immediately called his assistant, panicking. "Check Haley's family background from 15 years ago. Especially her father, hurry." In the living room, I was chatting with Kathy. She sat nervously on the edge of the sofa. The village was flooded, and the road to the train station was blocked. "I was late for your big day." Rockey usually disliked interacting with my relatives from back home, but today he acted differently, asking all sorts of questions. As he passed by Kathy, he dropped his teacup. Had I not reacted quickly, the hot water would have spilled all over the old woman. He kept probing. "Kathy, you really can't see anything?" Unaware, the old woman replied, "Yeah, cataracts. I can barely see. If it weren't for my nephew bringing me to the city, Haley wouldn't have pushed me to get surgery. But at my age, it's not worth spending the money." Seeing Rockey so tense, I couldn't help but laugh. After sending Kathy off, I hugged him from behind and smiled meaningfully. "Honey, you didn't actually believe that story, did you? So, is it a story or your secret?" Rockey's breathing quickened. I pressed against his back, feeling the slight tremor running through him. "Kathy is my great-aunt on my mom's side. I borrowed her likeness for the story. That's a common technique in storytelling, right? Think about it, if it were really her, the timeline wouldn't add up after 15 years. At that moment, his assistant sent back the report. I swiftly snatched his phone away, ignoring Rockey's protests. I loudly read the message. "Boss Rockey, your wife's parents are both alive. 15 years ago, her dad was the manager of a state-owned cotton factory. Didn't you meet them at the engagement party? Remember? Haley, give me back the phone." Seeing Rockey's furious, pale face, I laughed uncontrollably. "Sweetheart, the story was inspired by a real case from my dad's factory. It's called Desire, a reminder that men who can't control their desires will eventually burn themselves. Don't you think that's true?" Rockey finally realized I was angry. But unlike other women, the angrier I get, the more I laugh. "Rockey, you seduced my best friend on our wedding night, and I can't even be mad? When you came home, you smelled like someone else's perfume." The truth often comes out in the form of a joke. Serena is my best friend, a former model with long, tempting legs. Rockey had always had an interest in her, though he claimed that was in the past. "This is the last time, I promise. There won't be a next time." To prove his sincerity, Rockey deleted all her contact information in front of me. "Haley, from this moment, I love only you." Rockey held my chin, trying to kiss me, but just as he felt the heat rise, his knees gave out. He collapsed onto the bed, panting heavily. "Wait, why can't I move? My heart is racing." I comforted him softly. "It's okay. That's just a normal reaction to being poisoned." Rockey's eyes flew wide open. This kind of poison, although lethal, takes a long time to take effect. Afraid he might sense something, I chose to numb his emotions with a story. When a person's attention is diverted, they will naturally overlook the abnormalities developing within their body. A successful story can certainly stir the reader's emotions. You will attribute your rapid heartbeat, sweating, and trembling to the story, to alcohol, but not to poisoning. I was quite pleased. It seems my story is very successful. Why? What do you want? Rocky's eyes were filled with fear, his body twitching violently, teeth chattering. He struggled to get off the bed, but I firmly held him down in an embrace. You should have been on guard from the very beginning of the story. 15 years ago, at the Grand Hotel, don't you remember? Among the wealthy scions who assaulted me was Rockey. I gave you a chance to escape. The poison takes time to act. If you felt any guilt towards us, you would have been alert and saved yourself. But unfortunately, you were completely oblivious. You forgot everything about the victims. In your eyes, we were just chives, just tools. The memories I desperately wanted to forget were trivial to Rockey. After all, Rockey's family owned the largest casino hotel in the area. 15 years ago, while still on summer vacation, Rockey was sent by his father to learn management. When he learned that certain VVIP clients preferred fresh young female students, he immediately ordered his subordinates. Then go find some. They need to be pretty and innocent. By the way, aren't there so many who owe debts? Don't they have daughters? Think outside the box. If the girl works for 3 days, just count her as working 2 days. That should be enough. When chives go bad, they're of no use, but they still have a next generation. The past was too painful to look back on, but I had long been in the abyss. Don't remember? Let me help you recall. It was a Thursday. The sky was very blue. You were having a pajama party in the penthouse suite. When we were brought in, rock music was playing. You opened the door and scolded us for being slow, and then the 4 of us girls were sent inside. Haley, I was wrong. I love you. Rocky's throat was almost unable to produce sound. He humbly begged me. I was young back then. I didn't understand. I made a mistake. Give me a chance. I will make it up to you. You were young? What about me? My head hung low. You always say, I don't want your money. You were right about that. What I wanted all along was his life. Rockey was always accompanied by bodyguards, and he had a high level of vigilance. It was very difficult to approach him, and even harder to leave unscathed. All these years, I had been studying him. I analyzed his habits and psychological weaknesses, targeting his deep-seated suspicion stemming from losing his mother at a young age, tackling each point one by one. I created accidents to make him dependent on me. I had little desire for material possessions and jewelry, making him trust me. I actively proposed a prenuptial agreement to prove that I had no ulterior motives. Rockey painfully raised his face. The bedroom was on the 2nd floor of the villa. The maids and bodyguards were all on the 1st floor. He desperately tried to call for help, but his throat could only produce a hissing sound. Every minute, every second, felt so long. The sounds of struggle weakened, just like the suffering of life, which always has a moment of peace. When only my breathing remained in the room, I looked into the mirror, seeing my cold, smiling face at that moment. The man in my arms had his eyes wide open, his head slumped to one side. He died without closing his eyes, just as I wanted. In an instant, tears streamed down my face, and in disarray, I rushed out the door, yelling, "Help, someone, my husband is in trouble." The rich man's son died suddenly on his wedding night. This caused an uproar, with all sorts of strange rumors flying around. Some said he died during a group game, others claimed he was murdered, and even mentioned Thai sorcery. The police quickly determined that this was not an ordinary accident. The deceased had no external injuries on his body, but drug residues were found internally. Rockey was murdered. Was it revenge? There were professional security measures in the villa, and there were no signs of external intrusion, so that possibility could basically be ruled out. Since it wasn't an outsider, it must have been an insider. As his wife, I was the first to be suspected. In the interrogation room, the police sternly questioned me. During the hour you were alone, didn't you notice anything unusual about him? Their tone was harsh, clearly trying to put pressure on me. I appeared numb, my eyes swollen from crying. We had many guests at the wedding, and Rockey drank a lot, as did I. I was a bit dizzy and truly didn't notice anything. Rockey was known for being a playboy. He had many past relationships. Did his ex-girlfriend attend the wedding? Did they suspect a love motive? I spoke with a choked voice, heartbroken. Yes, it was I who invited her, officer. I know my husband's past better than anyone. If I couldn't even handle this little bit, how could I be Rockey's wife? Besides, we signed a prenuptial agreement. If my husband is dead, what can I gain? gain. Even the insurance beneficiary is my mother-in-law's name. The report came out. Rockey had been poisoned with a type of chronic poison. It doesn't take effect immediately. It requires at least 3 hours to take effect. At the time of the poisoning, Haley was in the dressing room changing into her wedding gown. And there were witnesses. She had no time to commit the crime. The Rockey family's business isn't clean. It seems we need to investigate the revenge angle. Without motive or opportunity, my suspicion was soon dismissed. As I left the interrogation room, I ran into someone familiar. I nodded wearily in greeting. As I closed the door, I heard a young officer gossiping. "Captain Tang, you know her?" Captain Tang stared at my back, slightly dazed. "Yes, I know her. 15 years ago, her father ran away from gambling debts, and her mother abandoned her. I helped her drive away the loan sharks. She was a very ambitious girl, but unfortunately, her fate wasn't great. My life really is unfortunate. In the story I tell, my mom loves me dearly. She never leaves my side. She transfers schools for me, works late nights for me, and fights with my dad when she learns I'm bullied. In a rundown, dark apartment filled with mice, my mother and I rely on each other. How I wish I could have such a mother to share hardships with. But unfortunately, after my dad went into debt, my mom decisively divorced him. She had long grown weary of my dad's incompetence, abandoning custody and eloping with her lover. At the station, I knelt and begged my mom to take me with her. She pried my fingers apart, unmoved. "Haley, your dad needs you. I can't selfishly take you away. Uncle Chun needs help too. Here's a number. If you need anything, call me. I'll do my best." After I was humiliated, I used the little money I had to make a long-distance call for help. The other end was a desperate mechanical voice. "The number you have dialed is not in service." My mom lied to me. It was a disconnected number. "Mom, it hurts so much. It really hurts." Lying in the damp, cold, broken room, I stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. The white walls were filthy, mold creeping in and corroding me. Who will come to save me? In the story, I want to treat my past self better, so I imagined a mother who shared my hardships, and a friend like Kathy who would help me in need. If the characters are fictional, then, did that cruel night really exist? Where is my dad, after all? The police investigation has hit another snag. They suspect the killer slipped poison during the toasting, but there were at least 700 or 800 guests and hotel staff that day, making it nearly impossible to find clues. As the investigation deepened, the police made an unexpected discovery. In Rockey's safe, there were many explosive videos, featuring many celebrities and politicians. Rockey was fond of throwing illegal parties, using these videos for blackmail. Public opinion was in an uproar. My favorite idol turns out to be a regular at those parties. He deserved to die. Who was the genius behind this? I bow to you. Isn't the Rockey family into charity? They even sponsored many girls' schools. Such a hypocrite, it's terrifying to think about. I'm one of the victims. They said they would introduce resources at the party. I drank something and lost consciousness. Waking up surrounded by strange men. They threatened me, saying if I called the police, they would send the video to my school. I'm not the only one in this situation. Me too. I chose silence out of fear, but silence doesn't help. Hiding scars will only make them hurt more. I'm willing to testify. I have evidence. More and more victims are bravely stepping forward, and the public uproar over the videos caused Rockey Group's stock price to plummet. Many were arrested and faced multiple serious charges. Rockey's death was overshadowed by a wave of insults and new investigations. But how was the poison administered? That question Rockey probably never thought of until his death. The truth lies where the story began, on the wedding bed. Rockey, high on alcohol, half-jokingly said, "I seduced your best friend. I was the one who initiated it." In the fitting room. In the hallway, another batch of guests came in to give statements. Serena and I exchanged a glance, then naturally turned away. This so-called tacit understanding meant everything could be unspoken. Yes, the poison. It was right there on her skin. 15 years ago, I wasn't the only girl who was humiliated. Among them was a secretary who helped cover my identity, and Serena. Through a brief skin contact, the toxin entered Rockey's body, and I took over from there. This way, we both had alibis. Rockey managed the hotel daily. He wouldn't be foolish enough to go to places with surveillance. We owe him a huge thanks for providing us with the perfect crime scene. I met Serena at the hotel. After my report went nowhere, I tried to sneak in to gather evidence. After being discovered by a bodyguard, it was Serena who pulled me into a cleaning room to hide. "Are you crazy? If you hand evidence to the police, you'll be dead by tonight." Her father was set up and ended up with a huge gambling debt before his organs were removed and dumped on the street. We empathized with each other and quickly became friends who talked about everything. That night, my dad wanted me to sell myself, but I refused. I mustered the courage to reject him. The police said we are independent individuals. I have no obligation to pay off your gambling debts. My dad was furious, his hands around my neck. I gave you life. You talk to me about independence? Without me, would you have grown up at all? Even repaying me with your life is justified. Just before I lost consciousness, a figure pounced from behind. Serena arrived, raising my trophy to smash it down. My dad let out a scream and released his grip. He was covered in blood, the pain driving him insane, and he picked up the trophy to strike Serena. In desperation, I grabbed a piece of electric wire from the floor and tightly wrapped it around his neck. I gritted my teeth, pulling with all my strength. With every struggle, I could clearly hear my heart pounding wildly. When I was a child, my dad was very strong. He could lift me up, making me taller than the reeds, where I could reach for the sky. The wire tightened in my hands, and tears blurred everything. The past, the future, the present. After a brief gasp, there was silence. My dad finally ran out of breath. The golden math trophy, covered in blood, rolled beside the corpse. Serena and I were both gasping for air, desperately breathing. For a moment, no one spoke. We can't call the police. Serena covered her bleeding head. Otherwise, your next life will be ruined. We need to clean up the scene first. Clean it up? You make it sound easy. At this hour, a taxi would definitely attract attention. We don't even have basic tools. How can we dispose of it? The nearest bay is 130 kilometers away. My body trembled. My teeth chattered, desperately trying not to let the tears fall. Moreover, a person's liver temperature can determine the time of death. If they trace it back, none of us can escape. What should we do? Why does fate have to be so cruel to us? Everywhere feels like a prison. We've long run out of options. I pulled out a bottle of poison I had hidden under the bed. It was my last resort. I chuckled hollowly. Just go. This is all my doing. If I die, it will all end. No, you can't. But Serena refused to leave. In the darkness, she held me tightly, fearing I would do something foolish. She said those who commit suicide can't reincarnate, and in the next life, I would still suffer. There must be a way, there must. At the end of the night, she suddenly raised her head and proposed a possibility. What if the body disappears? Wouldn't that mean nothing could be traced? Serena's father used to run a marinated meat shop before he got into gambling. Her family's backyard was full of pots and pans. She helped with the chores since childhood, making good marinated dishes. The pungent smell of star anise and meat saturated every pore of my body. The smell was so strong, even mosquitoes didn't dare bite me. In the kitchen, no one spoke unnecessarily. We just worked in silence. Of course, Serena would occasionally remind me, the fire's too big, it will burn. Take it slow. Got it. Frozen meat is fine. It enhances the flavor. But make sure to clean it well. Understood. Through the rising smoke, our eyes met, sweat shimmering on our faces, swaying delicately. Like tears, they just wouldn't fall. I love telling stories. Life is just a story. It has ups and downs, low valleys, and also climaxes. Of course, it will have an ending. When Rockey deleted all of Serena's records in front of me, I knew this story. Finally, I could start writing the conclusion. This is the true ending we've waited 15 years for. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.